Welcome everyone to the 60th Content Marketing webinar here at Writer Access. I'm very excited to be with everyone here today, particularly Douglas, who's with us. Douglas, are you here?
I'm right here, thank you.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, my screen was not large. I did a bait and switch on everyone. I actually turned my screen off and added the number 60 on there. I'm not sure if anybody caught that or not, but it's great to be here with you, Douglas. You are, of course, the author of the popular Unconscious Branding, now a best-selling book, How Neuroscience Can Empower and Inspire Marketing. And I've been working with you for the last couple months and chatting with you about Content Marketing Conference. We're super excited to have you as our debut keynote speaker, not only for the conference, which is new this year, but our first keynote of the session. So we're really honored to have you here, and it's just really exciting to see your presentation. I just want to go through a couple logistics with people real quickly. First of all, I want to encourage everybody to ask some questions. We've got a long, beautiful, gorgeous presentation that Douglas is going to be delivering today that's going to offer some earth-shattering insights, I think, into how you think about connecting and communicating with people. And feel free to ask some questions. We'll loop back at the end of the presentation and try to leave 5 or 10 minutes to ask some of the best questions that we receive, so keep them coming. Number two, please send some love, minimally to Douglas. I would love some love as well, but we'd really enjoy some feedback. We cherish the tweets that we get and archive and store them and look back on them and use them for our own promotions. So please help us with that if you could. And number three, we have a welcome opportunity for anybody to join us in Las Vegas in about 2 weeks from today's date. And you can follow us at the conference at CMC A to Z if you want as well. We've got 4 of our beloved writers at Writer Access attending the conference that are hopefully going to be tweeting and taking notes and doing lots of great things and tweeting out lots of information. So I also just want to explain to you that you certainly will be able to connect with Douglas via Twitter, I mentioned, but I also want to give you now some links to my 2 free books before I turn things over. As promised, if there are any writers in the audience, you can get a PDF download of my book, Professional Writing Skill and Price Guide. I wrote the book to try to better connect customers at Writer Access with the proficiency and the skills of actual work that's created. The book goes through sort of a really interesting analysis of what you should expect when you pay more for content, dissecting the elements of what to look for content that you pay more money for. And if you're a writer, well, how do you raise your game? How do you create content that's more engaging, that manages complexity in a different way and communicates differently? And the first book I wrote is Content Marketing Roadmap, which is a really fun book that offers about 101 tips on how to plan and strategize and create content that engages readers and keeps them coming back for more, so hopefully you'll enjoy that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Douglas. Again, Douglas, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Perfect.
Perfect. The intuitive mind is the sacred gift. The rational mind is the faithful servant. We've created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Albert Einstein also said to embrace the mysterious, that it's the true source of art and science. And he said that imagination is more important than knowledge. He created the theory of relativity by imagining what it would be like to ride on a beam of light. It's a neuropsychological technique known as dissociation. It gets you outside of your head and look at the problem from a different perspective. His work on energy and inertia was so original that there were no footnotes, which means he made it up. He created it. I want you to take this perspective today of honoring our intuitive and creative mind, of getting out of your head and looking at the problem from a different perspective and a whole new angle. Because if you could imagine your mind as an iceberg, as Freud once conceived, you can see that the vast majority of our thoughts, our actions, our decisions, our value judgments are made below the threshold of our own awareness. Evolution has designed our brains to make decisions without our knowing, while giving us the confident but false belief that we're actually in charge. In truth, most of the business of life happens unconsciously. So we need to be careful when we ask people why they do what they do. They simply can't tell you because they don't always know. And about 95% of our decisions are made unconsciously. So in an industry that relies on consumers to tell us why they do what they do, there's about 95 of new product launches fail. You know, this is a problem, and it's not just the marketing industry that needs to revise its models. It's the research industry, and it's how we approach marketing, creation of ads, and the whole approach to this business, which we've been doing somewhat wrong in the past. And I think the purpose of this presentation is to elucidate just how to move forward. Because there's an old adage in marketing that says that we must be single-minded. And single-minded is wrong-headed in the sense that, you know, if we focus solely on a logical, unique selling proposition that positions our product or brand as superior to the competition, you know, that's not going to move people, because every second your brain is processing about 11 million bits of information, but you're only aware of about 40 of those bits. And, you know, we have to understand we have a dual processing mind. And rationality and facts and figures certainly play a role, and we're going to get into that later. But if you want to move people at the depths of the iceberg below, you know, the intuitive mind, which works not by rational analysis, it works by emotional association, implicit association, which is actually non-declarative. It's things we can't recall. You have to focus on things like art, stories, metaphors, symbols, poetry, music, and imagery. These are the things that require you to go inside your mind and give it your own meaning. And these are the things that move brands and move markets. So the process for decision-making, you know, if we're going to be in the business of marketing, we really need to understand how people make decisions. And the paradigm has shifted significantly in light of cognitive science. The old paradigm used to be that we have a thought, you know, we think about a decision, we'd make that decision in our mind, we'd take action, and then that would create a feeling. Well, it's kind of like it works, but it's really completely the opposite. We start with a feeling in our body, and we take an action, and then we think about that action. In fact, most of what we do emotionally, and then we justify rationally after the fact, after the deal has been done. So to give you a metaphor, because we talked about metaphors being important, emotion is like the weather. It's simply part of our nature, and it's shaped by our environment, which means you don't choose your emotions. In some cases, they choose for you. So we can only try to choose our reactions, our conscious thoughts, in reaction to these automatic feelings that occur. Think of emotions as automatic action programs that guide us without having to think, guiding us towards opportunity and away from threat. And at this phase of our evolutionary development, our emotions are like deep flowing rivers, and rational thought is like babbling brooks. So if we want to know how advertising really works, it works through a process of unconscious behaviorism, which means that our behavior, our decisions are being shaped by our nurture and our nature at a deep unconscious level. And it is the intuitive, emotional conditioning that drives our decisions and our preferences. There was a remarkable study done at 2 different universities in Toronto, Canada. And they paired participants with made-up brands. These people had never seen these brands before. And they showed them a series of positive and negative associations, words, images, pictures. And the participants saw so many different associations that they could no longer consciously recollect which brands were connected with which associations, but they developed a preference for the ones that had been positively unconsciously conditioned. They called it the I like it and I don't know why effect. In subsequent research, these same participants were shown rational information to contradict their prior conditioning, logical facts that said that your choices were inferior, and they still went with the brands which they were positively emotionally conditioned. And that's how branding works. Intuitive emotional conditioning supersedes rational analysis. So in the marketplace, particularly online, marketers have a habit of foisting messages upon people, giving them disruptions and disturbances that are simply anchoring the brand with a negative emotion. You may get qualified leads, but you're also creating the I don't like it and I don't know why effect. You're damaging your brand. You can't force people to look at your content. You may get 2 out of 100 people, but there's 98 people that have been pissed off. So we really have to understand this emotional conditioning. How do we create that? So to understand exactly how this process of unconscious behaviorism works, Joseph Ledoux, one of the foremost authorities in neuroscience on the field of studying emotions, has a story to tell that elucidates this. Let's say one day you're out to lunch and you're eating at an Italian restaurant, you're having pasta or pizza. There's a red and white checkered tablecloth, and you get into a heated argument with your friend, and things get ugly. You both leave in a huff, and you're super pissed off. And the next day you happen to meet this person. You've never met this person before in your life, and he's wearing a red and white checkered tie. And you develop a gut instinct that says, I don't like this guy. And that's what happens. We create sometimes meaning where there is no meaning, because our minds work primarily by implicit association. So we have these emotional tags to events, and that creates the meaning. So if you want to have proof that we do not make logical purchase decisions, look no further than the dual purchase of tooth whitening formula and mouth rinse. Why in the world would I brush with a whitening formula and then rinse with a rinse that contained yellow dye number 3 and blue dye number 6? It doesn't make sense. It's irrational. But through marketing, through conditioning, the color green has become embedded in our minds with the associations of fresh and clean, such that that association to that property supersedes rational analysis. So Coca-Cola is one of the best marketers in the world, has one of the strongest brands, but they're not without their mistakes. When you look at their mistakes, it's when they're following rational analysis. Look at the case of Coke Clear, and this is not just Coke. This is the whole industry at the time. There was a clear craze in the 90s. And you could just imagine the focus groups. You're bringing this product in there, and you say, here's the Coke with the artificial coloring, the caramel coloring, which actually is not really good for you. It's burnt sugar. And here's the clear one with the no artificial ingredients. Which do you prefer? And in research, the rational-minded participants are going to say, oh, we want the clear one with the no artificial coloring. And you launch it in the marketplace, and it's a miserable failure. Because the color, the brown color's not just a beverage, but our perceptions. And without it, it feels like an imposter. We have these powerful emotional associations. And it's not just to the brand properties, it's to the brand itself. Look what happened with New Coke. Exact same thing. One of the best marketers in the world that really understood this process of unconscious behaviorism made a big mistake by paying attention to rational information that said blind taste tests say that Pepsi tastes better. But what they're forgetting is it's blind. They're forgetting the brand. When you add the brand back into the mix, the preferences shift. Our expectations create our reality. So to get you to understand how to start applying this to your business, I want you to imagine there's 3 perceptual buckets. There's this whole process of our experience, our consciousness, can be distilled into these three buckets. There's the physical experience of the body, the emotional feeling, the heart, logical reasoning, the head. And it just so happens that there are neural correlates for those three distinct drives. The brain is the only organ in the body that's actually organized in evolutionary layers. And at the deep base of the brain, there's the physical brain. This is the source of our instincts for survival. In the center of the brain, there's the limbic system. That's the center of our emotions and our memory and our bonding. And then the very most outer layer is the neocortex, and this is the source of our rational thought. But what's important to know here is the lower feeling brains serve as the seat of our value judgments and drive our behaviors. So think of this brain as an organizing framework. If you want to get to the deepest, most emotional, most powerful drives, go right down into the reptilian brain, because those are so powerfully unconsciously conditioned that they occur automatically and change markets automatically. So to give you a better understanding, I've created handles for these drives. These things are steeped in powerful emotions. And remember, emotions, again, are things we don't choose. So when you trigger elements of these things, you trigger hardwired responses. There's survival, there's safety, status, sex, spawn, or babies, sustenance, and surprise. So I'm going to show you a lot of examples. I'm not sure if you've all seen them. I am showing you some of the most pervasive marketing, big branded content that's out there. So perhaps you have. But I want to show these principles in action. And I think the creators of these ads did it intuitively. I don't think they were using brain science. But what I'm showing you is that by using brain science, you can replicate what some of these creators did so effectively. So if you've seen Volvo's Epic Split, it was a fantastic ad. The casting was brilliant. The setting was brilliant. The execution of the trucks driving down the highway was brilliant. But they were riding on something much more powerful than the muscles from Brussels. They were bootstrapped onto these hardwired responses. The first is the element of surprise. If you notice, you open on Jean-Claude Van Damme on a middle to close-up shot, and you're hearing the sweet, smooth sounds of Enya. That's a surprise. That's different. My mind's paying attention, trying to figure out what's going on here. All of a sudden, the camera pans back, and the trucks are going backwards. And then when Jean-Claude Van Damme conducts his epic split, we're all riveted. Have you ever stared at the highway at an accident despite your rational protests of the horrors that you might witness? Your decision to stare death in the face is not your choice, at least not consciously, no more than you choose the weather that caused the crash. Again, survival, safety, security, these are things that are deeply ingrained in our brain. And when you combine that with executional excellence, you get the most watched automotive ad in history. Geico has a tremendous history of creating a brand that was once a very small niche, and now it's a big, powerful brand. And they've done this through wonderful advertising with cavemen and geckos and pigs. But why was it one about a camel with an annoying question, guess what day it is, and a pretty awesome swagger? Why did that camel, why did that ad rise to the top to become the most shared of the lot? Well, remember, I mentioned that the mind works mostly by implicit association. We're so hung up with the literalness of our message, and we don't realize the really evocative power is often the intimations. And again, I don't think the creators did this with conscious intent. But marketers were quick to point out that the reason it spread is it gave people a rational trigger, because Wednesday is when you could share the content, because that is the literal meaning of what hump day means. But that's part of the story. It's not the whole story. What's driving the emotional impetus is the fact that it is a euphemism. It's for the emotionally charged upward. It's a metaphor for sex. And that's why this became a meme, and that's why it spread. It was so viral that a Connecticut middle school banned kids on the throes of puberty and in the grips of hormones from blurting out the catchphrase every Wednesday. It was that powerful. So again, these are hardwired responses, and they create powerful responses in the marketplace. There's nothing wrong with being provocative, because that's how advertising works. Evian has a great past history of creating a lot of ads that feature babies. Now, why do we love babies? Your decision to have a powerful emotional response to babies is not your decision. That's made by evolution, because if we didn't care about these adorable little creatures, they would never survive, and neither would our species. So they come pre-packaged with these powerful emotional responses. This was the most watched ad in 2013. If you haven't seen it, it's adults who are dancing and looking in the mirror to discover their inner babies dancing in sync with them. And again, what they're doing is they're commandeering these programs, the positive emotional response of babies, adding the element of surprise. When something is surprising, you're forced to pay attention to it. And Always Like a Girl has been lighting up social media. And if you haven't seen this, very simply, it's a casting call. It's a video about a casting call. And they ask the actors to run like a girl or throw like a girl. And the adults invariably do it in a manner that's humiliating and embarrassing and inferior. And they ask the same question to girls who are 10 and under, and they don't interpret any negativity in that statement. They run their hearts out. And this, again, is tapping into, and this is not just this particular spot. This is a viral campaign. This is a genre that's exploded because they're appealing to the upliftment of women, because women are oftentimes judged unfairly. And this is always, a feminine care product, their way of fighting back and empowering women. Again, it's about status, so fundamental to human nature. And arguably the most pervasive meme in our culture didn't even have the internet to make it spread. The California Milk Processors Board, Got Milk, is arguably the most imitated meme in history. And what's the structure behind it? Yeah, obviously, these were fantastic ads. They were executionally brilliant, but they were bootstrapped to something more powerful: scarcity of food. For over 99%, we lived as hunter-gatherers, desperately searching for food or dying. So again, nature has embedded this idea of paying attention to messages of food, especially combined with scarcity, that these drives are unconscious and emotional and automatic. So we have to understand that, brand is a verb. It's not a noun. It's a verb masquerading as a noun. It's a process. And although the process of decision-making is unconscious, the process for branding involves both conscious and unconscious processes. So this is a human process, and that's what makes this very applicable. I don't care what target, what product, what demo you're working on. These truths apply to everyone. But I want you to think of these as a set of tools, not rules. And I think that's an extremely important point. This is a process I'm going to show you, but the mind is not linear. The mind works holistically at multiple levels, parallel processing information. These are just a series of jumping off points that creatively you can leap off and apply these insights. It's not a checklist that we have to do all these 7 things. So the first of which is to interrupt the pattern. Brands are learned behaviors, and when your teacher told you to pay attention, she was absolutely right. The best way to learn a new behavior is through focused attention. But again, you don't choose what to pay attention to. These decisions are made by emotions, such as surprise, as we talked about. That's because the mind is a pattern recognizer. It's a prediction machine. Conscious attention is so limited, so we only pay attention to that which defies our prediction. So you only notice the car in front of you when it hits the brakes. Because the mind, the conscious mind, works on a need-to-know basis. So when we lean into that and we create novelty, we can create a powerful viral buzz. You know, every marketer wants to know how to create a viral buzz. This is one of the ways to do it, because novelty activates the dopamine system. You know, the system of wanting and the system of pleasure. And it makes sense that novelty activates dopamine because we have to learn new patterns. The mind has to learn, has to be programmed to want to learn. So the next ad transformed a stodgy brand. You know, Old Spice was a very stodgy brand. It was your grandpa's brand. And this campaign became among the fastest growing and the most popular. And perhaps you've seen this spot.
Hello, ladies. How are you? Fantastic. Does your man look like me? No. Can he smell like me? Yes. Should he use Old Spice body wash? I don't know. Do you like the smell of adventure? Do you want a man who smells like he can bake you a gourmet cake in the dream kitchen he built you with his own hands? Of course you do. Swan dive into the best night of your life. So, ladies, should your man smell like an Old Spice man? You tell me.
So again, I think the creators of this ad knew intuitively that pattern interrupts work, you know, and I think the point is now that you understand it, you know, it's not just the smooth character of Isaiah Mustafa. It's the smooth, seamless interrupts that galvanize your focus with the payout of attention and the hit of dopamine again and again and again and again and again. And again, this campaign engaged people, spread online because it was tapping into biological truths and human truths, not just consumer truths. So number two is to create comfort. Here's the paradox of the human brain. We're attracted to what's different, but we move towards the familiar. You know, the brain is a paradox. It has conflicting drives. And humans gravitate to the known. You know, the number one drive in human behavior is homeostasis. We seek the same stable, predictable state, not just in our biology, but also in our environments. And one of the most enduring truths of humanity is like attracts like. And again, it has to do with our hunter-gatherer past. You know, for 99% of our evolution and many millennia, we lived as hunter-gatherer tribes and bands of people of 20 to 150 people, many of which were close kin and people who were very close to us. People just like us. And, you know, here's the irony. In marketing and advertising, we've always shown people who are impossibly higher status than us, you know, supermodels or celebrities, and we pay a lot of money for that. Well, you can actually make your ads more effective by being more authentic. And the brand that best tapped into this truth was Dove with their Real Beauty campaign, which has endured. This campaign leveraged the human truth, you know, people like me. And at the time, again, this campaign was criticized or was called out to be extremely bold and risky. You know, why would they do that? Well, I think they're looking through the lens of the consumer and not humans. And by the way, this is not just an advertising truth, it's a media truth. Most of the programming worldwide right now is reality TV. But again, this is a slippery slope. You have to pull it off with authenticity. You can't half-ass this. And I think Dove is the first, you know, brand that's done it really well. And we just saw a spot, we talked about a spot for Always that's in that same genre. And American Eagle has a brand called Aerie, and again, they borrowed this same truth. They stopped photoshopping their models, and immediately the next quarter sales leaped 9%. You know, so this is just one illustration. You know, remember, this is creating comfort. This is one way to do it, but these are a couple of brands that have done it and had remarkable results. So number three is to lead the imagination. You know, imagination did not evolve for our amusement. It's fundamental to decision making. You know, that's how we decide. The way we decide is, let's say we have brand A and brand B. What we do is we imagine ourselves in the future with brand A and brand B, and we convert that experience into the same neural currency of feeling. Which scenario makes me feel better? That's how we make decisions. So the cognitive scientist Mark Turner said it best. He said, narrative imagining is the fundamental instrument of thought. It's our chief means of looking into the future, of predicting, of planning, and of explaining. Most of our experiences, our knowledge, and our thinking is organized as stories. So there's so much talk about storytelling. You know, we remember stories better because stories are how we remember. And if you want to look at a brand that led the imagination on a grand scale, look no further than Nike's Just Do It, which is perhaps one of the most lauded campaigns in history. The beauty of Nike's Just Do It, again, is it's artfully vague. You know, marketers are so hung up on the literalness of their message. What they're missing is the fundamental method in which we become influenced, which is this idea of being vague. When I'm vague, just like poetry and art and metaphors, I have to go inside and I have to give it my own meaning. This is why the book is often better than the movie. So when I go inside and give it my own meaning, that is the difference between internal motivation and external manipulation. Nike had stories about people who wrote to them saying it gave them the resolve to leave an abusive spouse or rescue someone from a burning building. You know, when your message takes on a cultural impact beyond the brand, you know you've done your job. And again, I think this was done intuitively. But now that we know that vagueness and this idea of ambiguity, and by the way, we often test ads, and if they're slightly confusing or ambiguous, we think it's a bad thing. What we're forgetting, it's the first step for learning, and it's the fundamental principle of persuasion. So look at other great brands. You know, iPod, this billboard ad says nothing besides the words iPod, but it says so much because our unconscious mind thinks in images. But the brilliance of the art direction of what Apple did is it projects you into the picture. You know, you could imagine that's yourself. You don't need to see the specific person. That's artfully vague in a very artistic fashion, similar to the line, Just Do It. And if anyone remembers the most viral campaign in history, it's the Blair Witch Project. And what was so amazing about the Blair Witch Project, and of course we could never recreate that with this kind of authenticity because so many people have pushed that button now in the marketplace, but you believed it was real. You know, there was a website, there was a documentary, there was a book, there were interviews. You went on the website and it talked about these documentarians that were shooting a film about the local legend, the Blair Witch, and they disappeared. And all of a sudden, people were saying there was some camera footage that a couple of years later was found, and you really were wrapped up into the story. You believed it. It led your imagination. And this movie was perhaps one of the, I think it had a Guinness Book of World Records in terms of efficiency of dollars spent on advertising and payout at the box office. Again, when we lead our imagination and we believe it, when you know, that's the difference between, you know, internal motivation and being manipulated by marketers. So number 4 is to shift the feeling. And really this comes down to the basics of cognition, which is our ability to know and learn information. You know, everything we do in the world, we do because of feeling. We have this artificial divide that we've created between rationality and emotions, and it's not even true. You are emoting every second that you experience the world. Emotions don't hinder our decisions. They serve as the substrate or the foundations of all our decisions. And remember, I said before, emotions create motion. They're automated action programs. So one of the foremost authorities on the neuroscience of emotion is Antonio Damasio. He's a neurologist. He had a patient named Elliot. Elliot had brain damage, severed connections between his rational and emotional systems. And at the end of an appointment, Elliot would deliberate endlessly without being able to decide whether or not he should sign his name with a black or blue pen or when to make his next appointment. without access to our emotions, even basic rational decisions can't be made. So we need to understand, A, there's no divide between the two. They're inextricably linked. But B, we need to understand that the emotions are the drivers of the actions. So this is a spot that I had the privilege of being the brand strategist on. And this became a global cultural phenomenon. It's called The Force by Volkswagen. So again, the brilliance of this ad was that magical leap from insight to execution. It's a fantastic ad. It's a fantastic story. But it's bootstrapped onto something much bigger. So if you know the natural patterns, where to mine, where to focus your message, you can replicate success, but not to the extent of this ad. This is lightning in a bottle. You don't recreate this consciously. The confluence of events that led to the success of this is like lightning. And remember, lightning, like emotions, is the weather. We don't choose it. There was so many powerful things in place, but understanding the patterns helps to, create ads moving forward that can be as effective or at least aspire to be anywhere near as effective. What's interesting about this ad, it was tested a couple of different ways. We tested it using self-reported research, survey data. Again, I said you have to be careful when you ask consumers why they do what they do. And it was below average in purchase intent. And that's the way the industry, has given this measure exalted status. But again, it has very little predictive validity. But there was a company called Sands Research that tests all the Super Bowl ads every year. And they had never seen an emotional response like this. It was the highest emotional score they had ever seen. And it became the most shared ad in history. Today it stands as the most shared Super Bowl ad in history. And again, it's rooted in a powerful story, again, the power of storytelling, but it's a powerful emotional bond. This is less so about an ad about a car and more about a magical moment in the life of a little boy and their family and the bond that the parents felt with that child in that moment that they will never forget. The most powerful bond, again, is instilled by evolution. It's your parent-child relationship. Those are steeped in deep emotions, but we're also bootstrapping it onto the equity of Star Wars. Again, all those implicit memories about Star Wars, and very importantly, the Volkswagen brand. Volkswagen started the creative revolution in advertising with honesty and brilliant ads and cars that made us smile. It was just part of American culture. You can't think of the VW brand with not having a smile or a good feeling. So again, we're tapping into all these things that exist within our culture with a brilliant ad. But again, attention is driven by what I call pattern interrupts. And this had multiple levels of pattern interrupts. It whispered when others shouted. This is a Super Bowl spot where they all go over the top. And this went under the radar, but it beat the Super Bowl of marketing before the game even started because we leaked it online intentionally. That was a pattern interruption. You didn't put your Super Bowl spot out early. Why would you do that? Let's wait for the big game. Counterintuitive, but a move that paid off dramatically. And again, it's the evil Dark Lord played by an adorable boy. That's different. That's surprising. That's engaging. And the structure of the story itself was pattern interruption. The boy tries the Force on the the doll, the household appliance, the dog, the sandwich, and then the pattern is interrupted when the dad secretly fires up not just the car but the minds of people. You could actually see a spike on the EEG recording at that moment because your mind is forced to galvanize attention, and then we showed at that very moment the VW brand in the car. So very powerful story. A lot of these things, intuitive, but when you understand the art and the science of these things, it can be very helpful. And remember, again, we talked about leading the imagination. A bad creative team would have suggested to unveil who Mini Darth was, and it was very important to keep his identity concealed because you could project your child or someone you knew into that scenario. So what is the role of consciousness in all of this? What is the role of rationality? I've been talking so much about the power of the emotions, but we have to remember the single-minded is wrong-headed. We have a dual processing mind. We make decisions emotionally. We justify them rationally. Oftentimes we need to give ourselves permission to take action, and I think sometimes advertising has to be the vehicle to give people permission to act on their emotional impulses. So we really don't have free will, we have free won't. We can apply the brakes of restraint, or we can give in to our feelings. And to give you a simple example of how logic could work, Certs has Retsin. What the hell is Retsin? Well, it's a made-up ingredient. It sounds pretty scientific. I'm looking at the shelf, and I have an emotional desire for some fresh breath. This one has Retsin. I think I'll choose this one. And if you want to understand the power of emotion, of not just being in your advertising, but baking it into your product, look no further than what James Dyson did in disrupting the vacuum category. He put all his emotion into the design of his product. This is a vacuum cleaner. He made it look like a piece of art. In fact, the designer, Paul Smith, had one in his London store on display. These vacuums had a pleasing, glossy sheen reminiscent of a Jeff Koons sculpture. He was a designer by trade, and because he imbued so much emotion into his product, and we have a dual processing mind, all his ads were directed at giving rational permission to buy. So in this case, the best way to go for your advertising was rational, because this guy put all his emotions into his product. Unfortunately, not all marketers do that. They look to you guys to add the emotional spin at the end. But his advertising was just about the facts, the 5,000 different prototypes, the clear product demonstration, patented dual cyclone technology, air moved at 9,000 miles. But remember, it was a story, too. He told a rational tale how he discovered that his vacuum didn't clean, it didn't suck up the dirt, and he gave it a clear product bin that sucked up the dirt. Actually, in focus groups, they said they didn't want to see it, and he ignored them, and it became a defining feature, and a feature that was imitated by the competition. So number 6 is to change the associations. Our minds work by implicit association, not rational analysis. So to change perception, you have to change the associations. If you can bootstrap your message to the top like heuristics that already exist, you can create a powerful effect in the marketplace, because it's not the literal facts, it's the emotional coloring atop the literal facts. If I said to you, do you want to have this steak tonight? It's 90% fat-free. And you're like, great, let's have steak. And if I said, well, it's 10% fat, maybe we should have chicken tonight. It's the same facts. It's the context or the emotional coloring on top of the facts. One of the most powerful campaigns in the food industry was the Pork Board's The Other White Meat campaign. What they found out is that they had an opportunistic, albeit unconscious, association between healthier meats at a time where health was driving meat purchase. They turned white when you cook it, just like turkey and fish. And the Other White Meat campaign was not incredibly creative, but with one flip of the switch, it tapped into a cultural mental heuristic. We make these decisions based on these shortcuts, and white meat is healthy meat. And immediately, it put $500 million on the table the first year that wouldn't be there during ordinary circumstances. So, what associations can we tap into to change our brand perceptions to move markets. And the last step, but certainly not the least, is to take action. Here's the tremendous irony about all of this stuff in the field of marketing. Branding doesn't happen best sitting on your ass watching television or surfing the web at work. It happens best in the authentic experiences of real life. And that's because we're more like human doings than we are human beings. You know, most of our brain is motor systems. You know, as hunter-gatherers, we walk 12 miles a day. And the purpose of our sensory systems are often to help movement. But when you have a physical experience, you encode a message in the deep motor systems of the brain, and you also engage the multiple senses. So it's perhaps the most efficient, most powerful way to learn a behavior, and brands are learned behavior. So if you look at a brand that defied traditional marketing completely and created a more effective and powerful campaign than Coke and Pepsi in terms of acquisition and loyalty, look no further than what Dietrich Mateschitz did with Red Bull. You know, like James Dyson, Dietrich Mateschitz ignored research that said he had a failure on his hand. They did concept testing, and he said the results were miserable. But he knew something intuitively. You know, he knew that to bond people to your brand, you need to bond people to other people who share your beliefs. And it wasn't just random. These were high-energy youth and high-energy events and a high-energy drink. You know, so what he did was he created these powerful experiences, killer parties, novel sporting events, extreme sports, things that arouse our physical and emotional sensibilities. So if I were to give you a brief that I have no idea what you're working on, but if I want to give you a brief, you know, I would say novel, engaging, social, physical, and emotional experiences. Now I'm telling you to do something in the real world, but look what Red Bull did. They created their own media company by these small events. You know, on the back end, he just amplified what he already created in the marketplace through his own media company. But, you know, this event is called the Flugtag, you know, again, crazy, silly flying machines and people trying to see how far they can go. It's an event, you have fun, all people come together, but he invented it. It's just one example. And, you know, again, marketers try to explain the incredible viral success of powerful efforts in the market. Well, look at this, what Red Bull did, and compare it to the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. It's exactly the same thing. I don't think they had this brief, but now you do. You know, the brilliance of the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, it's a novel, engaging, social, physical experience that you share online. They added the element of challenge, which is fundamental to human nature. You know, so it spread incredibly, again, because they're tapping into human truths, not just consumer truths. So we began this presentation with a quote from a scientist. I will leave you with that from an artist. When asked how he creates his masterful paintings, Vincent van Gogh said, "I dream my painting, then I paint my dream." Thank you.
I wish I could applaud for the people that were on today, because this was really pretty special stuff. I want to ask you a few questions myself, and please everyone send some questions in which we'll huddle up and gather together. But let's start from the back of this sixth prong where you talked about, you know, change the associations. That is really hard to do. Could you try to, you actually ask yourself, you know, what association can we tap into that motivates action? Do you feel like there are many different elements? How can we disrupt that? I mean, I'm not even sure what I need to ask on that, but that element of changing seems difficult. Can you expand on that a little bit?
It's the crux of the issue. It's like pushing a boulder. My background is in planning and research, and if you look at attribute ratings and you compare means over time, even for big brands that spend tons of money, changing an association, like it's a brand I trust, or is a, you know, is an exciting brand, or, you know, any kind of association, are very hard to shift. So what I would suggest, and none of this is easy. I wish I could just say, just push this button and your brand is going to move. The point about, what the Pork Board did is they found they had an opportunistic association, so there was an existing way to tap into an existing association, and I'm just saying, I'm like one of them. So what can you do? This is what people do with borrowed interest of celebrities and stuff like that. It's, oh, well, if Brad Pitt likes it, I do too. So we have to be creative and clever, but we can be oblique about it. We don't have to, oftentimes, our beverage doesn't taste as good. Great tasting, so-and-so. You just stating something of what you want to be is not the way to change associations. It's to intimate it, through a message that obliquely creates access to something. I don't know if I'm being specific enough for you, but it is a huge challenge. Without the context of a specific product and market, it's a little hard to get more specific. But you're right. What can you what kind of borrowed interest can you create, or how can these tools and techniques, always think about the association that you're trying to create. I think that's another thing to think about. Many people, before they write their ads, what are we trying to change here? And let's boil it down to a couple of attributes, and not just the ones that are explicit, but the ones that are implicit. Pepsi could say, oh, well, we really want to be tasting better than Coke. No, you actually want to be cooler than Coke, because people just think Coke is a really, cool brand because it embraced humanity and it owned and anchored the brand with happiness, a basic human emotion. So, it's a challenge, but there are tools in the arsenal that especially when, you do some digging.
The questions are pouring in, and by the way, so are the compliments of awesome presentation, engaging, this is the best thing I've ever seen, so hats off to you. Here's a question. How does the company that sells products to other companies connect emotionally with them?
That sells products to other companies.
Yes.
So like a B2B play. Emotions are at the center of every transaction, and B2B is the same thing as B2C. I've spent a lot of my time in advertising working on B2B stuff. Really, it starts with the relationship. You can create advertising and use the same principles, but on a B2B level, it's all about the relationship and the experience, So how can you understand them better? How can you respond to them better? Without understanding more of the specifics, it's hard for me
to answer. Yeah.
Perhaps. Go ahead. No, it's the same. It's the same principles. B2B advertising is very much the same as B2C advertising. I did a lot of work for MCI before it became Verizon, and just to give you a quick for instance on a B2B play. During the digital heyday, which was back in 1999, I worked on this account for 5 years. The thing about the MCI people, these were the phone people. Phone company wasn't cool, and this internet boom is happening, and there's companies like eBay and Cisco that were taking off. But the guys that worked on the phone company, this was all about the network, and these guys were actually the ones driving the digital revolution. They owned the backbones of the internet. As a matter of fact, one of my clients, a guy who worked there, I'm not going to say he's a day-to-day client, he works at Google right now, is Vinton Cerf, and he's the guy who created TCP/IP, the protocol on which the internet ran. And, pretty amazing guy. He actually did create the internet, not, like Al Gore tried to intimate. But the point being is, like, they felt that they were the nerds and all. They were the nerds, a bad word. You want to be a nerd. They felt like they were the uncool guys, and we created a campaign called Generation V, you know, and it featured all of their employees in a really cool leading edge light, and it was all about image, and it was not about an age, it was an attitude. And we featured you know, really cutting edge scenery, and a campaign that was about giving them a feeling of mission and purpose that, you know what, if you really want to know about the digital age, if you want to work with a company that's driving it, come to MCI. And it was a completely emotional campaign. It had nothing to do with the rational proof points of the network and all that stuff. But it created, you know, they had a Generation D room there. They had mouse pads. They had T-shirts. They felt proud all of a sudden to be part of the digital revolution because now people knew that they were actually at the center of it. And, you know, it helped them hire employees. It did a lot of things. My point being is that was a B2B campaign, and it was completely rooted in emotions and not in rationality. You know, they could have thrown 100 different proof points about the networks and the speeds and this and that, but that's not how people are moved. So these principles really apply identically because at the end of the day, the central tenet here is they're humans, not consumers. So we're not even focusing on this one's a business person, this one's a consumer. They're all humans, and we're all responding to the same things.
And just to add some more creative ideas to that, we take a company like IBM, for example, that beautiful vision of the eye, you know, with the flashes popping off it. I mean, absolutely brilliant campaigns, the whole Think campaign, basically, right? But even look at small-scale B2B companies. I mean, really, much of the presentation was about creating some brand personality, and B2B companies, in particular, to your point, need to create personality. You know, we need to move beyond thinking about features and benefits of our products, obviously, and more about elements. But one note on surprise, and again, a super small scale idea, but you know, at Writer Access, when a customer signs up for a $50, you know, kick the tires test of our platform, we mail them a physical copy of one of my books. They just get it in the mail. Boom, surprise. You know, so
right.
Simple things can happen and need to happen. So I wanted to just ask your question about that. I get to another question here. A question came in. I am thinking about how to implement the 7 tools through text and not images, although images were important to see examples of. I can think of storytelling, metaphor, fables, allegory. What else would Douglas suggest?
You know, I'm a writer, so I think in words, but guess what? It's not the words, it's the images attached to those words. And that's the brilliance. That's why poetry and writing is so powerful, because it requires you to use your imagination. So, you know, and unfairly sometimes as I evaluate creative teams, sometimes I gravitate to writers because I see these people as idea people, which is unfair because, quite frankly, maybe I'm a shitty artist because the images are what moves people. But what I'm saying is, you know, the power of words is tremendous, and whether it's stories. You see, words are like radio. You know, they're theater of the mind. And why I use radio is every time I would brief in, nobody wants to know what the radio spot is. But audio is text, right? Or, you know, it basically comes down to words, but it makes you go inside your mind. So there's so many different things you can do with words when the goal is to kind of evoke feelings. So, you know, I think, you know, there's so much you can do, but think about storytelling, think about metaphors. You know, I don't have to see a metaphor. I can simply say, you know, I shared with you, Byron, an article I just wrote for Psychology Today about the use of metaphors. When you're talking to someone, you know, I learned this a long time ago. I was working at JWT, you know, and we had what we called day ones, and I always started off my day one, which was a strategy day with a client, with a metaphor, you know, because like, here's the problem, and I would reduce it to a metaphor. I was, you know, working on the launch of Zantac, which was the #1 selling drug in the world at the time, and it's a heartburn medicine, which is a really sad commentary on the world at the time. But, you know, that was a whole new way of looking at the world because they've been treating it with antacid, and now this was something that prevented it. So I said, here's a map, here's a globe. This is like discovering that the world's not flat. It's a big deal. We have to communicate this bigness. So obviously there was a visual image of a globe and a map, but we can say these things with words, and, you know, I mentioned that Warren Buffett said, you know, describe Berkshire Hathaway as a cigar butt approach to business. You know, it has one puff left and it's free. You know, so you know, when you say things explicitly, I'm not giving people opportunity to give them ways to interpret. So think metaphorically, think storytelling. I have a lot of detail in my book if you want to get into it, and you know, so there's many different ways to get at it, but just think about the emotional coloring and not the literal facts.
Exactly. And by the way, just going back to my Hill Holiday days as well, you know, we would begin creative strategy with the metaphor discussions like, you know, if product X was an automobile, what kind of automobile would it be? You know, if product Y was a cocktail, what kind of drink would it be? You know, so this gets our mind out of thinking of things, and it's just fascinating. But we've had a couple more questions that I'd love to get to. We've had several questions about nonprofit organizations. You know, how do we reach you know, our donors? You know, how can we do that differently? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Nonprofit is fantastic. I mean, if you have an opportunity to work on nonprofit, you have an opportunity to do some of the best work, because there's a mission there. You know what I mean? There's a purpose and a mission that you could tap into. A lot of nonprofit ads, you know, you see the starving children and the flies around the eyes and stuff like that. You know, preying on people's fears and insecurities is probably not the way to go. And a lot of people do that because it works. But after a while, there's no pattern interruption. So we start ignoring those messages because we feel manipulated. With nonprofit, I would try to find your mission, you know, find your soul-stirring purpose. Try to, you know, I think, you know, there's a duality to humans. We're selfish and we're incredibly altruistic. When we bring out our brilliant side, we are at our best. And you can see that bifurcation in the internet. It's like there's, you know, content about watch this dumbass and content about look at the amazing things we do, you know? So, you know, some of the most viral content is showing humanity at its best. So I would say focus on your purpose and your mission, and try to find something that's soul stirring, and be provocative. It really depends what the product is. You know, the truth campaigns for tobacco and things like that were pretty riveting and fairly aversive. So it's not all, you know, focus on the positive. There's just a richness to nonprofit because it's not someone trying to sell you something, not trying to sell and manipulate you. It's someone just saying, you know, you should do good. And I think there's a cultural trend towards humanity and away from the old ways of business, and I find that's one of the messages that people gravitate the most about, or what I say. You know, we've been taught that we have to try to sell stuff, and consumers are just not having it anymore. As a matter of fact, they're just pissed off, and the context is we're trying to separate them from their money. You know, so when brands try to do this, they fail. They could fail miserably. Look what happened to Starbucks. Good idea, horrible execution. But look at Airbnb. You know, they bring people together. They have a program now when there's disasters. They you know, create ways to bring people together at a time of need. Now, talk about brand gold. That's pretty amazing what they do. But it's baked into their product. So think about what your product is, and you know, find that emotional terrain and try to do it in a manner that obviously feels authentic and not like you're trying to prey on people or, you know, manipulate them.
And obviously there's an emotional connection there as well, just to throw that out. And while you're thinking about the answer to this question, I'm just going to throw one more thing at the nonprofit. And I want you to think about this. The question is, in a market where your business is statistics driven, how is it possible to appeal to your audience emotion while including statistics? While you're thinking about that, I just want to chime in nonprofit real quick. Actually, I think a lot of nonprofits make the mistake of not looking at who their actual core donors are and finding out who your target audience is. There's a great story in Harvard Business Review about an aquarium, not exactly nonprofit, but they were tanking in their. They built this gorgeous new $250 million aquarium, one of the best in the world, and they couldn't figure out. They were running billboard ads and mass media ads, but they brought in some data crunching analysts that looked at the neighborhoods of who were the actual members of the people that were paying these annual membership fees and the core support fact. And guess what? They weren't driving on the highways they thought they were. So they went into the neighborhoods and changed their target audience. And it was amazing how they ended up increasing their advertising budget because they had a lot more success. So a lot of it is just connecting with the audience, creating the right story, creating the brand, but also looking close to where people are. What are your thoughts on the statistics-driven business?
And that's the thing is maybe people give this a short shrift and they say rationality is not important. They're absolutely wrong. They're inextricably linked. There's no Cartesian divide in how your mind processes. As I mentioned before, we're emoting all the time. So rationality plays an important role. If you can say something remarkable, absolutely say it. The problem is, I've looked at so many briefs, and everyone's probably had this experience. You got nothing here. You do exactly what everyone else does, and we're always dealing in that space. But if you do something remarkable, rational proof points excite your emotional sensibilities. If you're going to sit down with me for dinner, I'm like, this is a $1,000 bottle of wine. Want a glass? That's a rational proof point. You're going to get pretty excited about that wine right there. And so it's not one or the other. It's both. If you do something remarkable, say that, but not a laundry list of facts. You know what I mean? What is your message that you're trying to create, and make sure that your proof point, is in line with that message. We sometimes try to just throw a list of facts at them, and ironically, less is more. Behavioral economics has taught us that it's the cohesion of the story, not its completeness, that determines the persuasiveness of the message. So, have a small story, have a couple of facts, and make sure the facts line up perfectly with your message. And if you don't have something special or, significant advantage, then try not to lean on the facts.
It's so hard to almost create campaigns and answer these questions, which is what everybody wants, of course, with your great mind on the line. But one of the things that comes to mind, with this statistic-driven question, did you know, for example, that if 30 million people held hands, they would completely circle the Earth, right? Cool stat. Interesting, right? So that's a stat, and why can't you bring emotionally connecting, statistics like that to your audience and forget about what you actually sell? Bring them the emotional connection, and maybe build an archive of such statistics. Let's go to another one that was interesting. How about reaching out to potential customer bases with taboo subjects like health or STDs or addiction? Street level people that yearn for information. Thoughts on that? It's a bit like nonprofits, really, don't you think?
No, well, so how to reach out to those folks. It's funny because when the research business started to shift online, I was working, with a guy who started the company that basically was the first disruptor in the research space online as that marketplace shifted. What he did was focus first on exactly these topics. These things were ordinarily done through focus groups. And wow, all of a sudden someone is explaining to him, and go back to 1997, 98, here's a chat room. And you're like, oh, so I could go to a chat room and I could talk to people about this stuff. And they're not sitting in a focus group room with a two-way mirror and bright lights and strangers watching them, you know. And all of a sudden, you have real conversations. You know, they start to emerge. You know, there's a product that's coming out. I read about in Fast Company. I forget the product, but it's a network that connects people who suffer from depression so that they can rely on others who are going through what they're going through. And get information. I had done some work for a major biotech company, and you know, if you go to their websites and sometimes look at their blogs, you're astonished at the depth of camaraderie and feelings for people who suffer from a disease which there is no cure. All they have is each other and these drugs to take. So if you find the right environments, which again goes back to people like me, the create comfort thing, you know, when you can find that safe circle somewhere, online, in person, elsewhere, you know, what can you do to facilitate those bonds with a very focused group of people that share beliefs, attitudes, and most importantly, feelings. They know exactly what each other is going through. So, you know, that's what you have to think about is how do you create that community, and how do you also respect their anonymity if they want to? You know, it seems like there's so many digital ideas that could come from that, and none of them are easy to execute, but a lot to work with, I would think.
Really great stuff here. I wish you could see all this positive feedback coming in, Douglas. Couple more quick ones. There's such great questions I have to ask. Should brands target one generation at a time? And then I want to give you another one. If your brand has a large anti-product following, what is your opinion of attacking those criticisms head on and advertising in a way that makes those head on versus ignoring them on other aspects of the brand?
So, what was the first part? The second part is if you have anti-product criticism, how do you address it?
Yeah, the anti-product stuff. How do you address it? Why don't you go ahead and go with that one first?
You know, you got to be careful about leaning into, you know, you give it more energy sometimes when you respond to stuff online. You know, the irony of social media is if we think we're making more rational decisions, it's just the opposite. They're being fanned by the flames of emotion of our social groups, and that's what's driving the conversations. It's not the rational proof points. It's even more emotional. So don't dive headlong into the wood chipper. You know what I mean? If you have anti-product criticism, I see this happen a lot with companies. You know, I've done work in the real estate management industry and stuff like that. You get people bagging on the product online, and they jump online. You know, there's a time when it's appropriate to respond. There's a time when it's not. You can look very defensive when you have to respond, you know, point for point on everything other people say. So, you know, depending upon what the criticism is, if it's setting the facts straight. Look, I've written articles for Fast Company, and someone will jump on and say, you know, brilliant, inspiring story, tremendously skinny facts, and then they're ranting and raving about how my data is wrong, and I'm like, I'm talking about the Super Bowl in 2012, not 2014. We seem to be on a different page here, you know. But I did it very nicely. You know, I'm being attacked for something that is so obviously this guy's fault. And he's the one who looks like a dumbass. But I did it in a very so sometimes you have to set the record straight, but don't kowtow to people. Don't you know? And it's better to just change the conversation. You know, and I think maybe what you were talking about a little bit. You know, we divide each other into groups. One of the most effective campaigns in you know, what marketers, experts say, you know, Mac versus PC, and who would argue the most effective campaign of the first decade. That's a very tribal thing, and those things really work. You attack one guy, and you make, you know, you imply implicitly, if you use a PC, you use Microsoft, you're a dork. You know, if you use Mac, you're a cool guy. And those work really well. And then Samsung comes out and they're like right back at you, Mac, and they're doing the same thing. Don't be a lemming. Don't wait, 3 days for this new app when, by the way, the Samsung is cooler. They work incredibly well, and but sometimes there's a bigger brief. Sometimes we don't have to beat up someone. Sometimes we don't have to be aggressive. That is the paradox. There's no right or wrong answer. I think historically we've been very competitive against brands. Look, I worked on MCI. MCI dismantled AT&T in the 90s, just completely tore them apart. But we did it with parody and humor and some very rational stuff. And, when your market is like right there for you and you know that they have a glaring problem, go at them. But I think the bigger brief right now is humans, not consumers. So, the petty arguments we have as brands, is it really better to, is the Mac really that much better than the Whopper? They add humor, they're not like, they're not hard driving competitive attacks across each other. So you got to add humor, but also just maybe think about a bigger brief. Try to go above the fray sometimes and act bigger, because sometimes when you do, your message speaks louder. So it's a slippery slope. Sometimes you have to set the facts straight, but be careful not to ever seem apologetic. Unless you apologizing for something that was a grievous error on your part.
Just one final question. Should brands target one generation at a time? Can you talk about that a little bit? How do you build personas for brand is really another. I mean, do you think generationally?
Yeah, you certainly can, and I think that's conventional wisdom that you should, and culturally you should really understand that generation where they're coming from. But it's not the only way to go. There's sometimes human insights that transcend generation, and the problem with generation advertising is it often backfire. Like, look at the Pepsi generation. It's so obviously an attempt to get a group of people to say, I'm with you guys. And you're like, well, you're just a brand and you sell sugar water. And I'm not saying it was a horrible campaign, but compared to Coke, who took the high ground and owned happiness and said, the famous Hilltop spot, I'd like to teach the world to sing, apple trees, honeybees, snow white turtle doves. They just created these associations that didn't say, this is who you are. The problem with generation advertising is sometimes when you go there, people feel like they're being talked to. And it especially falls on deaf ears when, if you call older people, silver foxes or something, something that's obviously pejorative, but you're trying to say, you're cool, but you're really saying you're kind of old and you're not relevant anymore. So it's a slippery slope. I think, you certainly should try to capture it. I mentioned the Generation D thing for MCI, but that was an attitude, not an age. And it was, it really was that. The ad showed people who were like 22 years old and an old guy who was equally cool. So it tried to transcend the demographic and say it's an attitude, not an age. I like attitudes over demographics better because I think attitudes are inherently about emotions and democratic, demos are about, statistics that we kind of segment people. So, be careful when you do it. Don't make it clear that you're talking to them. Just find out what they dig and feature it.
Really appreciate you being on today. Thank you, Douglas. Are you still there?
Yeah, I am still here. Thank you, Byron. I'm glad to be here. if you have any questions that are looming, there are ways to reach me online.
Right on. And I'm just have up on my screen right now, Unconscious Branding is Douglas's book. Everyone can now take a look at it. You can go to unconsciousbranding.com, and you can see how to get a hold of Douglas directly if you need any marketing consultation, if you need any reference, if just feel free to reach out to Douglas there directly. I'm going to send out an email that I know we had a lot of questions that we didn't get to, and I'm going to give Douglas a good challenge here in the end. I'm going to send an email out saying if you didn't get your question answered, you'd like to ask Douglas one question, what would it be? And I'm not going to promise you that Douglas will answer that question, but I will give Douglas all the answers, and and perhaps it will become some information for his next book, is what I'm thinking. And I also want to throw out the opportunity for anybody that wants to make a late entry into Content Marketing Conference. Douglas will not only be there Wednesday, the day he's giving a keynote, but he'll be there the night before, and I'm having a speaker event. If anybody chooses to sign up for the conference based upon this fabulous presentation, I'll invite you to that event with the speakers so you can meet Douglas personally and chat with him along with some of our other speakers. It would be a fun opportunity for you to do that, and we look forward to some last-minute guests that join us at the contentmarketingconference.com, which most all of you have gotten some information on. So without further ado, it's been probably one of our best and most engaging webinars that we've had in a long time, so I appreciate Douglas joining us, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Douglas, any final words of wisdom as we sail away to Vegas here?
No, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing you and anyone else in Vegas.
Terrific. Thanks very much, everyone. Appreciate you tuning in.
Bye.
Bye-bye.